Get started anyway, so I'm going to call to order the council workshop for Monday, July 17th at 7 o'clock. Council, there's been an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the workshop? Okay, moved and seconded by Councillor Mao. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. All right, and there are two items on this evening's agenda, and but I'm going to move right over to Mr. Milburn to start our discussion on the community amenity contributions. Mr. Milburn.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council. Just for the folks at home and those in the gallery, my name is Dan Milburn. I'm the General Manager of Planning, Properties and Permits with the District North Vancouver. My co-presenter is Rick Danieluk, the Acting General Manager of Finance. And we're happy to be here tonight to speak about community amenity contributions. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is to provide council with a summary of community amenity contributions, and specifically a financial summary from 2011 to 2022 by type of amenity and by location. And that includes whether or not the amenities are inside or outside of key growth centers. So for the benefit of, again, of folks at home and in the gallery, by way of a little bit of background, the district has a long history with collecting community amenity contributions, or CACs, which came about because the district, like many other local governments, determined that there was really no other means of collecting revenue to pay for amenities needed to create complete communities, as the existing statutory tools, such as development cost charges, were just too limited. So what are CACs? Well, CACs, or community amenity contributions, are contributions paid by developers through a negotiated agreement to the district as part of the rezoning process that is initiated by the developer. CACs can include amenities such as civic facilities, public art, and financial contributions towards other amenities and infrastructure that cannot be obtained from the other financial mechanisms such as DCCs, which I've mentioned. And I'll go into this a little bit more in my presentation. CACs are applied as a one-time charge or contribution paid by the developer for capital works. The agreed-to contribution would be obtained by the district if and when the district decides to adopt the related rezoning bylaw, or at some predefined future phase of the approved development. The total value of CACs is typically 75% of the estimated increase of market value of the land attributable to the density increase that's being requested. The district's CAC calculation methodology is established in a community amenity contribution policy of council, which was approved in December 2010 to establish a fair, clear, and consistent process for negotiating community amenities. Subsequent amendments to the policy have increased the recommended flat rate of community amenity contributions based on market changes over time. As well, the introduction of annual inflation rates to the recommended flat rate CACs has been brought forward. So these community amenity contributions are secured through multiple mechanisms, including phased development agreements, density bonus bylaws, housing agreements under those bylaws, and then servicing agreements. So then moving on, tonight's presentation will include a quick overview of the financial principles followed in the establishment of CACs. We'll talk about the policy approach taken by the district to define amenities in the community. We'll specifically have Rick walk us through the CAC financial report for 2011 to 2022. And then we'll talk about some, what I would call changing landscape in terms of housing and capital funding in the future. And then finally, next steps. The one thing I would note tonight is you'll notice there's no resolution before council. We are not seeking direction from council by way of resolution. This is just important information to assist with future deliberations and decisions. So quickly then, in terms of financial principles, the community expects new development to pay its own way and to make a positive contribution to the community. If development imposes a new burden on the existing infrastructure, then the infrastructure may need to be improved. Capacities increase, such as bigger pipes and so on. So we take that same approach for other community amenities, such as civic facilities. We expect the development to pay for the impacts of growth. Another key principle is what we call, is related to the capital for new infrastructure, is the infrastructure attributable to the project? And what we mean by that is there a clear connection between the service demanded or imposed by the project and the actual project itself. So you can imagine a new building full of residents might need sidewalks, might need infrastructure to support those people to be pedestrians moving to and from services and the development. So that's how we start to talk about a clear connection. The next is the cost should be reasonably proportional to the development demand, which means each project needs to pay its apportioned share, especially for larger projects where maybe larger infrastructure projects where no one development can pay the full cost necessarily. So those can be combined. And finally, we think about concurrence, as in, is the infrastructure demand being met in a reasonably foreseeable time frame? So we don't just collect money and then spend it 20 years later, because we want to relate the infrastructure spend to the demand in the community. So there's a connection in terms of time. In terms of the rate calculation method, whether it's set in the bylaw or negotiated, it needs to provide some certainty for developers and landowners. These parties need to anticipate these costs in order to determine an agreed value of the lands. The system needs to be fair and transparent, with the community able to see a description of the amenities proposed in council policy and a description of the specific amenities that are anticipated to be triggered by the rezoning in the staff report to council and discussed at the public hearing. And then local governments need to consider the impact of those rates around the market forces. So is it pushing the cost of housing one way or another? Is it driving the project to be unaffordable? What are the market impacts? We need to consider that when setting rates. All right, so in terms of community amenity contributions, I mentioned at the beginning that the district has taken a policy approach. So this has started for some time, and it started with the community amenity contribution policy itself. And 12 years ago, after completing extensive community engagement, council established a vision for the community through the official community plan, which spanned the planning period from 2011 to 2030. The plan focused on having a more balanced and diverse population, meeting the population's needs in terms of housing and transportation, creating complete, compact, and connected neighborhoods, connected with amenities, being more economically dynamic and sustainable, and reducing our environmental footprint. The plan itself then was implemented through a series of actions and strategies, such as council's climate actions, parks and open space plans, transportation plans, housing plans, and so on. The focus of tonight, it really comes out of the implementation plans that council has approved for town and village centers. Those plans themselves include definitions and descriptions of the amenities that are needed in response to the growth center change. And I won't go through each of these, but they are summarized in an attachment to the report tonight. So after approximately 8 years of implementation, in 2019, council initiated a review of the official community plan, or OCP. And after re-engaging with the community, council unanimously endorsed an OCP action plan in July of 2021 and focused on the 4 topic areas of transportation, housing, economy and employment lands, and climate emergency, with an overarching commitment for social well-being and equity. And I mention this in particular because those items relate to amenities, the amenity impact on the community. And the vision, that excellent vision in terms of focusing and prioritizing our actions for the future has really been tested over the last couple of years with the global pandemic, related economic downturn, followed by material shortages, tightening labor supply, rising inflation, and now interest rates we've not seen for decades. So as a consequence, the challenges we face have become more acute, and our policy response needs to have an equal measure. Ultimately, the vision outlined in the official community plan and the action plan relies on the success of our 4 key growth centers as a means to deliver low carbon, compact, diverse housing choices and support public amenities and employment space. So in terms of the amenities specifically that are identified in the attachment, I won't walk through them in detail, but just I have some images that give some illustrative examples of community centers where people can congregate and meet, receive childcare support, possibly obtain books from the library in that location. And also we have playgrounds and play spaces, public plazas, walkways, and public art. All of these are described as measures needed to make a complete community and identified in the plans that council has approved over a number of years. So I mention this because to really, I think, to crack open and take a look at those amenities again, we need to be informed by community input again and input from stakeholders because that's how we came up with those amenity lists to begin with. They were informed through numerous engagement events with local residents, business operators, members of the general public, and others. Each process definitely took some time, between 1.5 and 4 years, and significantly changing the amenities may require that kind of engagement again with the community around what they would see for the future, if not the current amenities that council have approved. I'll now hand it off to Mr. Danieluk, who will present the investments that have been made since 2011 in community amenities. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. The next two slides highlight the value of the community amenity contributions from approved development since adoption of the OCP through to the end of 2022. This first slide is a summary by amenity type, and this second slide will break down the investments by center. The values shown for housing are based on a prior year analysis on the impacts of rental housing on development revenue. In total, including that housing, there's been approximately 185 million in community amenity contributions from approved development across the district. The major investment areas have been in community facilities. There's two facilities that were created, one in Lionsgate and one in Lynn Creek. In the housing, and whether it was market rental housing or social housing, and along with cultural spaces and public art. Care facilities are also worth mentioning. The other items that are listed there generally can fall into the infrastructure category, and so the province is now going through a bit of a process where they're trying to improve those definitions. But with the current CAC policy, this is what's been realized since adoption of the OCP to the end of 2022. At the bottom of the table, you'll see label OCP CAC policy, and that 27 million amount relates to cash that's been either collected or been secured and remains unallocated. And including that cash and these other amenities that have been realized, finance tracks all of that development, the development revenue occurring inside and outside the centers, how it's being spent. And generally, when you're looking inside the centers, we follow a rule where if it's an investment that's required inside the centers, it would be funded by development within the centers. There are exceptions to that, but it's a general rule that we've been following since adoption of the OCP. You can move to the second slide. This slide shows the same information broken out by center. You'll notice that same line, OCP, CAC policy, it totals off to the far right at 27 million. And under Lynn Valley, you'll see an amount of $13 million, or approximately half of the grand total that's remaining unallocated. And one of the primary amenity projects that remains in Lynn Valley that hasn't been pushed forward is the upgrade and expansion of the Karen Magnuson Rec Center. Other notable investments, as mentioned, that you'll see under Lynn Creek, 11.4 million for the community center investment there, and 14.5 under the Lionsgate Village Center for that community rec center. That's currently being created. When you're looking at the past the subtotal and into market rental and social housing, you'll see the lion's share of the investments are being made there. And those two totals bring us to the 185 million that's been realized. Sorry?
Can you elaborate on what 43 million for market rental means? what, 66 million social housing?
Sure. There was an analysis done on the impacts of rental housing on development revenue. It was a few years ago. And so it's just an approximation of what CACs could have been realized if we had not included that rental housing in the projects. So
So it's not really,
Yeah, I think I get the
It's
point
not-
you're,
we've talked about this before.
it's the opportunity cost,
Yeah.
though. It's
So-
recognizing that it is a contribution, because had we done it as strata development, then the full value of it would have come back to the municipality. Instead, by changing it to the lowered value designation, we get less back in CACs.
So you really got to ask a lot of questions to understand these slides and this information. You know, it's not enough to present it like this and assume that the general public understands what $66 million under social housing, under community amenity contributions. It's really not that number. It's something else. Right? Like, I just feel in all of these discussions, you know so much more than I do. And I'm the one that has to put up my hand in favor or against. And it drives me crazy because we're the ones that are having to make these decisions going forward when you bring forward development proposals or rezoning applications and you present these community amenity contributions, which were once one way and now they are quite something else. They were looked at very differently 20 years ago, and they have evolved. And now they are supporting only the town centers, really. You know, during the budget discussion, we had a discussion about the fields. You know, why weren't those fields built? You know, because we couldn't move any money under this policy out of CACs to be able to build those fields for all the kids that are going to be living in those communities, playing on those fields. So I just,
It is an all-in figure. I mean, the point of it being to say that if you had just built as highest and best use everywhere, this is how much the district would have additionally made. And so we've decided not to make that for a social benefit.
but I think the piece that we miss, Mayor Little, is that we never go back to look at, you know, what changed, what was the benefit, was there a benefit? Like Mr. Milburn talked about in his preamble, you know, to protect our environmental footprint. Did we protect our environmental footprints? I actually have no idea if we did that. You know, I see a lot of concrete down on Mountain Highway that I didn't see before. I see rivers and creeks being rerouted for developments that we didn't used to do before. So have we actually protected our environmental footprint? He then went on to say, you know, we wanted low carbon communities. Is low carbon, are we low carbon with concrete high rises everywhere? I'm not sure. You know, the implementation committee was set up to be able to test the policies of the OCP against how things were being implemented. And then we got rid of that committee. And then we did this, you know, review that you talked about, the white papers that Mr. Bidewell put together for us a few years ago. And I don't know if it actually did what the implementation committee was actually going to do, because they were going to test whether or not the OCP policies were going to be followed. And I think a lot of them weren't followed. We know that because we rezoned industrial land for residential, and you know, that was absolutely, and we tore down old affordable rental to make way for expensive condos. So I just think that we keep going forward without really going back and testing to see whether or not all of these things that we've done have been a benefit. What are they costing? And my question that I've been asking for years, what is it going to cost us? What is it going to cost the future taxpayer to replace all of these amenities? And I never get the answer to it. In 20 years, in 25 years, what is it going to cost to replace all of this infrastructure with the population that we have in the district? That's going to be an interesting number. That's going to be a big whopping number for my kids if they get unfortunate enough to, you know, stay in this community. But it is going to be an astronomical number. And I don't think we've ever been able to answer that. We don't know.
Well, we We do. I mean, we take the assets and we devalue them over their lifetime and set money aside through the reserves for their eventual replacement. The problem is, are we producing high value, high cost things that eventually will mean that our tax burden will have risen on average to a level that's not sustainable anymore?
You don't actually want to answer, I don't think.
But I'm confident that we have the ability to set money aside and pay for these things. It's just whether or not eventually we're going to have to we will have to rely on the tax base to pay for it, not new growth necessarily to pay for it.
Well, okay, and I'll just finish with this because I've taken enough time on my first round, but I will say that we put money aside to replace Delbrook Rec Center.
Yes.
And we still had to borrow $30 million. So, right, let's times that by 3 maybe. Right? Like it's all well and good that we're putting money away for a rainy day to replace these things, but it's never enough. Putting the money the way that we've done it over the past has not replaced dollar for dollar these infrastructures. And a lot of this CAC, I think we have built up communities that, are going to cost us a lot more than we ever imagined they would be. And they have resulted in communities that we never thought were going to be the cost that they are. It was supposed to be housing that was more affordable because it was dense, and that is not what's happened at all.
I've also got a comment from Councillor Forbes. Councillor Forbes, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to, first, I agree with a lot of the things that Councillor Murray has said, and I still don't understand why, as Councillor Murray says, you work with this every day. There should be better notes. You can't just say market rental and plug a number in if there's a factor there. And 4 simple words, as in forgiven CAC, something like that should be noted. And it just takes a little bit more words, but not much more work. And I think that's what we need. The other question I have, though, is I note that number 0.4 under the chart says that the valuation of 110 million is based on 2017 Coriolis. So I'm wondering, are we looking at present value dollars here, past dollar values? Have we done any computation on what, when you say 110 million, what does that really represent? 110 million in 2017 or 110 million in 2023? That's my question.
Mr. Milburn.
Thank you, Worship. I'm hearing lots of questions about the information around housing and how we calculated the housing information. So this was provided to Council previously in a staff report, and so we'll recirculate that information to Council. I think it is a key important question.
Can I just get my question answered?
Yep, just about to. I think it is a key important question that Council's asked around using the 2017 Coriolis report data. So we've used that for a number of years as a way to set a baseline so we can compare projects approved over many years. We have the intention to bring forward current numbers this fall for Council, so we can recalibrate what that would be based on, today's dollars generally in terms of the value of all the contributions that have been made from 2011 and until this year. Again, we don't do a net present value calculation for every contribution. What we try to do is, for comparison purposes, is pick one value, and that value is based on the Coriolis analysis of what the impact of the land value is if you were to have a rental unit or an affordable rental unit versus a strata unit. And then we use that as a per rate value that we apply then to all the units. And we've done that consistently since 2017. But as I say, we intend to come back with updated numbers this fall. In addition, I think I'll mention, and maybe I'll instill a bit of Mr. Danielek's thunder, but we do also want to bring back more detailed information about the costing of the near-term infrastructure, which is in a subsequent slide. This is high-level information, backcasting, looking at the past, but we definitely know Council wants more detailed information when they talk about the future costs that could be spent on the infrastructure. We intend to bring that this fall.
To be clear on the question from Councillor Forbes,
Yeah.
the 2011 projects that are contemplated in here, are they valued at $2017?
$17, that's correct.
There you go. That's your answer.
And if we have projects in here from 2021, are they valued back to 2017 or at 2021.
They're all based on that 2017 rate. And as I say, we do intend to come back to council this fall with more current values that we would then just apply to all the projects approved from 2011 to today.
I understand that. I guess my problem is that you're not giving the actual value or present day value of past projects. And that's important that we know that. So what you're doing is discounting more current projects dollar wise and possibly upgrading, or generally discounting and possibly upgrading older ones into 2017 dollars. So that's the point that I was trying to make. The other thing here, it's like comparing apples and oranges, and it can't be done. And the other point I'd like to ask is number 5, where we're talking about the Lynn Valley Youth Center again. That money has been set aside for years and years and years, and the Lynn Valley Community Association also wants answers on why that hasn't happened, why it's not scheduled in the budget, and if the money is allotted in here, what is it allotted under? Or sorry, it's not included in this chart, but if you go to the next chart in your notes, I think it says it is included. So where is the money for the Lynn Valley Community Center or Youth Center?
Mr. Daniluk?
Through your worship, Councillor Forbes, it's under community facilities. I believe it's a very a small amount.
400,000?
Less than that, yeah.
Less than 400,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So, yeah.
But it's tracked separately by center. We definitely have all of that information.
can I just, my last comment, can I just ask that when there is extenuating information on things, that the notes be better? Just saying all of the capital projects approved in 2023-27 and funded by CACs is included above as future commitments. Would it have been that hard to sort of list what is included from the latest budget in there? So I just would like to see better notes when there's extenuating factors involved. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Daniluk?
Just related to that last question and two that came from Councillor Murray and about the ambiguity around amenity contributions since adoption of the OCP. It's my feeling, and I think Dan spoke to it a little bit, with that lack of clear direction from the province on community amenity contributions and not enshrining them in legislation has led to this confusion. It's hard to compare between the municipalities, and there's overlap between the CACs and the DCCs. So ultimately it does lead to confusion, and they've recognized that, and we're anticipating changes to clear up those definitions and make it easier for people to understand and make it clearer about how things are paid for. So we look forward to that legislation hopefully coming forward.
I still don't think it will go as far as Councillor Murray is suggesting, which is that it's basically a value audit for how we spent it, not just how much we collected and generally where we used it, but whether it was used effectively and efficiently and achieved the goals that it was set out to do. But I don't think the provincial legislation is going to solve that problem for us this fall. Mr. Milburn.
Yeah, we had a very similar conversation in spring 2019. And we presented council with line by line detail about the expenditures to that date. And so we do anticipate bringing that information to council this fall. Mr. Daniluk has provided summary information today, but we do anticipate to provide that breakdown, and not only in terms of past expenditures, but what's in the short and medium term, which is our next slide, I think.
Appreciate it. Well, let's move along to the next slide if we can.
Okay, so this slide highlights the facilities and public spaces that have been identified for CAC funding. As I was mentioning, we're anticipating new provincial legislation this fall, including new definitions for amenities and infrastructure. And we're hoping the lists will be simplified and have less restrictions, making it easier for planning and communicating out to the public and council. While the current CAC policy includes parks and transportation uses, we're expecting the new definitions to show these projects funded through DCCs. So you'll notice a line near the bottom there called infrastructure. And currently, any related infrastructure that's not obtained through other sources, included DCCs, you can apply CACs to that infrastructure, so long as it's in the CAC policy. Staff will be refreshing cost estimates for both the amenities and infrastructure to support changes to developer charges, including the CACs, but updates to the rates and rate structure will likely follow the new legislation from the province. We may come forward, depending on what the timing of the new legislation looks like, with an update to reflect inflation again, but we're really waiting for the province to step forward with their new legislation before doing a fulsome review and bringing forward the new rates. And in terms of the categories themselves, Dan mentioned the sources for the information earlier on in the presentation. So you'll see the community facilities, plans for upgrades to the library, an art space was planned potentially in Lynn Valley, more investments inside and outside of the centers in public art, heritage initiatives have been identified, as well as additional plazas and care spaces. And of course, any lands required to support those amenities are also eligible and have been identified for CAC funding.
Great. Thank you. So in terms of changes we anticipate in the near term, so starting this fall and going into 2024, we anticipate the need to move from case-by-case negotiations for community amenity contributions. And this would include then the potential to establish housing targets through policy, infill housing, density bonus zoning as an opportunity, community amenity contributions defined in policy or bylaw, so they're more, again, transparent, clear, and DCC waivers as well, potentially being defined in policy. So we really see this as being a critical need based on the fact that the province will be establishing housing targets. And it's important that we define what our expectations are as a community in policy or bylaw, so that's clear for all developers when they submit applications under those targets. So in terms of some key next steps, we do have a housing needs report that will be presented to council in July. This is an update. This was anticipated when council approved the first housing needs report in December of 2021. We knew we wanted to update it based on 2021 census data, any approvals council had made in the last 18 months. As well, council approved the Metro Vancouver Metro 2050 plan, which identified some key direction in terms of housing and population change in our community to 2050. So all that information has been consolidated and will be shared with council and presented in a public report for council's consideration at a regular meeting in July. Next is Housing Supply Act, which I alluded to already. We're expecting a housing target order to be effective by September of 2023 from the province, one of 10 communities across the province. And then the province has indicated a further round of communities will be identified in the fall. We anticipate, as I said, preparing cost estimates for the short and medium term projects identified for CAC funding and to have that presented to council in Q4, so the fall. And then we anticipate the need to update the CAC policy rates themselves to have flat rates tailored to neighborhoods and establish those fixed rates by center in 2024. So that's the end of my presentation, but we have presented to council in the past on community amenity contributions, and there are a number of questions that do often come up. And we thought, as I thought about the presentation tonight, I thought it might be useful just to walk through some of the key questions we often do get from council members or members of the public. And just Rick and I'll take a stab at answering those because it might seed the conversation a little bit from council. So. Yeah, this was just in listening to both the conversations that have occurred and thinking about the presentation. I've come up with this list, so I'm just going to show it to council. Again, it's just to seed the conversation. I anticipate council may have many of these same questions. Okay. So one question is, how can the district ensure amenities do not inflate the price of housing? So either with direct costs, so if you apply a community amenity contribution fee to a housing project, or by creating increased demand in the community and therefore just generally inflating the cost of housing. So when we do analyze and come back with advice for council around fixed rate CACs, we definitely want to consider the direct impact of that on affordability and on the impact of the development. Now, typically, and council has seen the guidelines published by the province, and we do know that if the rates are reasonable, essentially it means that the value of the land is lessened as opposed to the value of the units increasing. And this is because the market itself essentially sets the level of what people are willing to pay. So when we establish a community amenity contribution rate, the developer has some fixed costs like construction, and they have fixed costs like the revenue they need to generate in order to borrow. So typically around 13 to 15% in terms of profit margin. So those are generally fixed for the developers. And then when they have a CA, they're presented with a CAC cost as well, and it's known in advance of purchasing the lands, the developer then will reduce their purchase price offer in terms of relative to the amount of community amenity contribution being demanded. So the intent then behind the CACs is not to push all the values of land everywhere up. So we want to make sure that those rates are balanced. It's the same analysis we do with DCCs or development cost charges. If those rates are too high, it may push the overall cost of the project beyond what the market can bear. And so we need to be sensitive to those rates, or else either projects simply don't get approved, they just don't come forward, or we can actually push the market up and push the cost of housing too high. So we want to be sensitive to that when we propose new rates.
Well, I was just going to say, so no, this is,
but it doesn't.
there is a legitimate piece here. So when we did the Marine Drive plan, I remember immediately after we saw developers were taking our pictures and our drawings of what Marine Drive was going to be looking like and using it to market it as a premium neighborhood. And so we pushed the level up of what they could buy the prices at, what the market affordability of the prices were at, because we had such a gold-plated finished sort of neighborhood and public space. And I remember when we actually had the vote for the OCP, I commented on that and said, you know, that if we actually build this out like this, the costs are going to be immense because every single street is a Cadillac. It's got tree-lined streets and furniture everywhere and parks and lanes and all these other things. And it's, you know, and so we were pushing up the end market price.
In the town center.
Yeah, but that's what this is. It's saying that certain amenities may actually push that up, and we've seen it. I absolutely agree with that. We saw it on Marine Drive, and we're seeing it now in Sealand, I think, with tree-lined streets everywhere. Amazingly,
but we're not reducing them. We're not saying we need, you know, like how many rec centers and plazas do we need?
Yeah.
Like we're taking like in Mountain Highway, we took out a perfectly good regulation sized soccer field and put a very beautiful, you know, walking oval with, you know, furniture, and we clear cut a bunch of trees that had been there forever and then planted some more. Like, I don't get it. I really don't. I don't understand how we can say that what we're doing with the amenities is not increasing the value. There's developers in other municipalities that are using pictures of our trails to say, look what's in your backyard. Yeah. Like this is kind of broken. And it's just business as usual. This is why I continue to ask for a reflection back to see what we've done, to see if it has produced what we intended within the OCP, but we're not doing that. We won't do it. I don't get it. I really don't. We have taken affordable communities. We are now one of the most unaffordable places in the country and the world. And yet we still keep going forward with this very platinum application of housing and amenities.
Mr. Danler.
Through your worship, Councillor Murray, just thinking about how we're planning for the expansion of amenities like recreation centers. Really what we're aiming for is just to make sure that we're maintaining the service levels that the community's already come to enjoy. When it comes to our service levels for recreation centers, we look at the population growth and we try to make sure that's about the same amount of spaces available for those recreation needs as we go through the implementation of the OCP. So we're not aiming for something necessarily bigger. In some cases, there are changes to service levels, but I don't see that as being one of them. And I'm sure.
But Mr. Daniluk, sorry, I'll push back on that a bit if you want to look at Lower Lynn. Because the largest development that exists in Lower Lynn has their very own community center built right into the development at Denna. They have a swimming pool, they have spa facilities, they have community amenity rooms, you know, weight rooms, they have all of those things, right? Like a lot of those very large developments have facilities within the development. And, you know, I mean, we're trying to keep things more affordable, but we're adding things. And, you know, is this more about what the community has come to become accustomed to? I mean, the Seymour, we had one recreation center for years. That was all we had. And then we got Parkgate, you know. So, you know, I mean, I think if that's really why we're doing this, I think we have to have a big discussion about that. Because a lot of these amenities have been added after the fact, you know, not as part of what the OCP was talking about. I mean, if we want to talk about what the OCP talked about affordable housing, it talked about protecting older housing, it talked about protecting industrial land, and we did none of those things. So.
But in the defense of what we've done, though, both particularly Cap Road, we identified that the western portion of the district was actually quite deficient in the number of reckoned public and community spaces. And so Lionsgate was created for that purpose during the development of that local plan. Sealand, you know, arguably there are resources not too far away, although to go east of the site, you got to go all the way to Ron Andrews. To go north of the site, you got to go all the way up to KM. And right, but it's not a 15-minute community, as they say, or something else where people can live and stay within the community. They're going to have to cross the highway in order to be able to get to a rec center. And so I get it, maintaining service means increasing service as population grows. The challenge is, and I know Corey's on the call here, is we're not adding park at the same rate that we're growing. And so if you take a snapshot in time of how many hectares of park we had with the population 20 years ago versus how many hectares of park we have now with the population now, you'll see that we've actually been decreasing the amount of park per person. And in part, it's simply because it costs a fortune to acquire land for park purposes. And so we've instead been trying to reprogram and change the intensity of use of the park in order to be able to make sure that at least the access is growing with the population to those areas. But it's tricky. There's no question about it. That if you build a community with all of the amenities that anybody would want in that community, you are going to be causing your own problem, which is that your prices will go up. Nothing scares away affordability like services. If you live in downtown Vancouver with the number of units, you'd say if density provided affordability, downtown would be the most inexpensive place to live. But it's full of services, and services chases away affordability. You may still need them, but there's no question. If you can go walk down the street and find a park and a trail and a rec center and 4 different restaurants in the neighborhood, you're going to be paying a premium dollar for housing. And so, yeah. And
it's a community center, not a rec center. And, but in Lower Lynn. And we, you know, we didn't, when we built the OCP, and I remember the argument, Corey came forward so many times and said, why are you not adding more park? And I remember Richard Walton saying, well, we've got lots of park. Look at all the parks we have in our mountains. They're everywhere, right? We have all those parks. But then we didn't bet on a pandemic and a public health officer telling everybody to go outside. And they did. And they're staying outside. And so we are now, when we knew that we were the backyard for the region, but now we're the backyard, the front yard, the side yard, the vacation spot, like we're everything. And we have to deal with the cost of that. And we're not. These amenities there's a very small number for parks and trails in this list. What is it, Mr. Daniluk? It's very minute compared to the impact that we've absorbed over the last several years. For trails, $5.2 million is nothing.
You may want to add to that too. And in listening to the conversation, I think this strikes a very important point that we definitely don't want to have an ad hoc conversation about amenity needs in the community, such as, when a development comes forward. We want the discussion on amenities to be policy driven, directed by council in terms of the implementation plan and the public realm that's desired for that community. And what we definitely don't want is a developer, proposing some grandiose thing that's very expensive and expensive to maintain. We want to define the amenities ahead of time and for council to give that direction. And in some cases, as Mr. Danielek mentions, it's just ensuring that we're managing the population, or how many square feet of recreation space in a building we're providing relative to the population change. In other cases, there are circumstances where we know we're deficient. For example, when council approved the childcare strategy, we knew we were deficient in spaces and we needed to make some key investments in the town centers and outside of centers related to that growth, and to invest the community amenities to ensure that we created more spaces, new spaces that could meet the growing demand, but also encourage private investment and development of school lands for additional spaces to meet the deficit. So this is a combined effort. It's not the one solution for all things, but it's definitely a combined effort. And but definitely having a policy-driven approach is important. And just in terms of parklands, the district in 2001, this is Metro Vancouver data, had 20.6 hectares per 1,000 people of municipal parkland. The next closest community was Vancouver, West Vancouver, pardon me, at 10.3. So we have, I'd say the regional average in terms of communities is closer to less than 5. So we have about 5 times the average of municipal parkland in terms of on a per square basis. So I'm just mentioning that there is significant, and if you're just looking at hectares, right, and that's only one way to measure parkland. You also need to look at the amenities themselves, right? What kind of services are provided in those parklands? Now, there are some key parkland expansions identified in council's implementation plans. There is one in Lynn Valley that is identified, a very significant piece of parkland addition, and then some additional and quite expansive linear park and expansion to Marie Place Park in Lynn Creek. We also have some acquisitions in Maplewood, close to the Maplewood farm. So there are some, because we know there will be additional need in those centers themselves for open space, and those have been identified by council in the approved plans. I think almost all those plans were approved unanimously by council, other than Maplewood. So there definitely has been some direction that staff have followed in their negotiations with developers to try to achieve the standard that you see. And it's not the kind of standard you see in a rural area, in a suburban area. It is a higher standard in terms of the public space, because you have a higher density of people per area. And you don't want those people driving all over the place looking for amenities. You want to try to provide those services in close proximity, like transit, in close proximity, because that is the way that we're going to create a complete and compact community. But certainly I would say the absence of certain of those amenities in our single family neighborhoods doesn't mean that those single family neighborhoods are affordable either.
Do you have other questions you wanted as food for thought? Sure. Or do you want to open?
Just a few more. Can the cost of amenities be apportioned amongst developments? We've heard the concern that, some developments only pay a portion of a project, like a community center. Maybe the shell is only paid for. Who pays for the fit out? And so this comes down to, we know that some amenities are quite expensive, and it will take multiple developments in a center pooling those resources to invest in the construction of that fit out and that center. That's the same philosophical approach to DCCs as well, or development cost charges. We know that large pieces of Maine can't be afforded by one project sitting on that street, so you pool the resources to invest in that main improvement in a Maine. Same philosophy applies to other facilities and so on. Another question is, why have public amenities, and this question was already asked tonight, why have public amenities when certain services are provided privately? So this again comes down to council's direction. What is the standard that's appropriate for the community as a public feature to be provided everywhere? I mean, we could say, well, most people, maybe they have or could build a pool in their backyard. But that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily invest in a public pool facility to ensure equity of access across the community. So we have to try to consider what are the services in the community and try to adjust to that. But council can choose not to provide a service in any particular area if they feel that gyms or pools or ice arenas or play fields or any particular service is already being provided in the community or a neighboring community or by private industry. That's a choice we make. But again, a key consideration in that choice is equity of access, standards for access that are pre-established by council and policy and then implemented over time through development approval. Next, how are existing neighborhoods impacted by growth in centers and amenities? No doubt existing centers, existing neighborhoods surrounding our key growth centers can be impacted by the growth in a center. And so that raises key questions as we go forward. Are there certain amenities that are of a regional benefit, right? Like a large park space that people can come and enjoy, and they live in many parts of our community. Is there a certain area outside the center that benefits from the development or redevelopment of a community center? We also track and invest in infrastructure outside of those 4 key growth centers as shown tonight. So there is actually some growth, council approved between 1,000 and 2,500 units in the 2011 OCP outside of centers. And so those will generate community amenity contributions as well that can be allocated outside of centers. So between those 2 kind of sources, as in direct projects outside of centers, as well as regional amenities, those are 2 kind of key considerations to ensure that we have distribution of benefit across the community to address the impact that we know is there. And then finally, this question was asked, what about future maintenance and replacement costs? Are we setting a standard that can be afforded sustainably over the life cycle of the asset? And Mr. Danielek may want to comment further on that, but I know he answered it in part already tonight. But.
Well, just briefly, we are setting aside any growth-related tax revenue, and as the engineers build the infrastructure and amenities that are being put in place to support that growth, we let out that tax revenue so they can operate and maintain that infrastructure and amenities. To Councillor Murray's point earlier, is it sustainable? Can we do it? We did bring back that information a while ago, and we do need to bring it back again to provide some more clarity on that. It's my feeling that when it comes to operating and maintenance, yes. When it comes to replacement, it's more gray. I think that's something that we're going to have to look at for sure.
It's dark gray.
Yeah. But when we compare ourselves to how other municipalities are planning, I think we're doing a reasonable job making sure that growth is paying for growth. And I do look forward to bringing back more clarity on that gray in the future.
I'm from a principal position though, Councillor Murray, it means that future generations are going to be paying to maintain future generations' facilities. Why should we, in other
Why
words,
should we be paying for everything now and not allow the future to pay for it?
well, or make the decision to not have the amenity based on the fact that we don't want the future generations to have to pay for its replacement.
Or the question would be, do we need the amenity? And we never ask ourselves that. It's just included in the package, and it's to support that one neighborhood when we are looking at areas that have been deficient in maintenance and replacement for decades. I think Mr. Cohen has come in as a set of new eyes. I think we've had other managers that have come in that are, the bathrooms in Kate's Park are the same that they were when I was 5. We have never replaced them. It's that kind of thing. So we're building all this new stuff in one area, and everything else is kind of crumbling and not being maintained, or it's being maintained, but how many coats can you put on a bathroom door? It's the same as the schools, right? It's there's so many questions that go along with all of these things. And, we talk about daycare where we were once deficient. Are we still deficient?
Yes.
Are we still deficient? Are we becoming deficient in street-oriented retail? Because we're allowing daycare to exist in every single zone. So we are taking light industrial land, we are taking retail land, and we haven't done anything to change the balance of trying to provide daycare plus maintain retail and industrial. We are taking full height ceiling, 30-foot light industrial commercial properties with buildings that could accommodate commercial businesses, and we're allowing daycares to go into those properties because we don't want to shift our policy to say, how can we do both? How can we keep the commercial light industrial property for the businesses that we need and the jobs we need to provide in this community while also providing daycare? Instead, years ago, we made a policy that you could put daycare in any zone, and now it's impacting business and light industrial operations, and we do nothing. We do nothing. I mean, unless I bring a motion for it. Councillor Pope brought forward one last week about social housing on one of our fire halls that was totally supported. I've been talking about this for years and nothing happens. I don't get it. Am I the only one with a concern? Are the commercial realtors out there and the business community out there the only ones that are concerned? Are staff not concerned about the fact that we are taking the hustle and bustle of our retail street access to properties and allowing daycares to go everywhere?
I don't know that the council necessarily is going to want to bring in a motion right now that's going to stop.
Sorry, Mayor Little, I didn't say stop. I said to find a balance between protecting part of that use while still accommodating the need for daycare. It is not one or the other. It is accommodating both in a different way.
No, I'm not trying to make light of the situation. I'm trying to say that if you actually take the footprint of light industrial property and you take the square footage of it that's been converted over to daycare, it's an infinitesimally small percentage of the light industrial property that's been converted.
Well, there's commercial property on Deep Cove Road.
Commercial too, although commercial, it's probably a higher percentage of commercial than it is in light industrial because of what we saw in Marine Drive and other spaces. But
yeah. So it's just that conversation, and it never seems to come
for a
up.
bit, and then Councillor Ma. Councillor Forbes, your comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to push back a little bit and also give a different perspective on how we should be looking at things. I know from the time I came on council that a lot of us were saying at that time, not all of us, but a lot of us were saying, we don't need the marble countertops. We don't need this. We don't need that. We need to have more housing, more rental housing. In 2018, there wasn't that much rental around. It was all strata and townhouses. So we made ourselves quite clear in that first term, 2018 to 22, that we wanted affordable housing and drop a lot of the luxuries that were making housing so expensive. And when I listened to Mr. Milburn's comments just a little while ago, he's saying we need to make things clear for the developers. And yeah, that's one way to look at it. But the way I look at it is, why don't we make things clear as to what we want and what we don't want, i.e. we don't want weight rooms and exercise rooms and pools in every building. So if somebody comes to us with a project and they're going to give us 4 affordable housing units in there because they're spending all their money on a pool and a weight room, then tell them we're not interested in pools and weight rooms. We're interested in 20% affordable housing in the building. So if that requires them to do some adjusting by lowering their costs by not putting in the expensive amenities, then that's what we need to make clear. Don't approach us with expensive stuff because we're, unless you can give us a better ratio of affordable housing. We should have a 20% policy. So that's obvious to the developer. And we should be pushing that idea instead of them coming to us and saying, well, we can't really afford it. Our pro forma doesn't work because they have all these expensive things in there. So I think we need to have that percentage policy done, and I'll make a report and bring that forward. It won't be till September now, but I'll do that because I think that will help the developers know that we want the affordability. So cut out the expensive stuff. And there was one other thing I was just going to mention too, but that's the one that's most important to me. I mean, there are ways to look at things and we need to look at it through our citizens who are trying to afford housing, not through what the developer wants to do and then give us a little pittance of affordable housing, because that's not going to solve our problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Milburn, followed by Councilors Ma and Hanson. Mr. Milburn.
Thank you, Worship. Happy to clarify that. When we work with developers through the pro forma analysis, we use an external consultant, which is our consultant, and gives us advice. And so when we compare construction costs as an input to that calculation, we don't base it on whatever the developer wants to do, whatever. And I think we use the terms luxuries that might be proposed by the developer. What we're looking at is the square footage of construction based on standard rates for construction. And if the developers choose to spend more money in order to attract investors, that doesn't impact the CACs that we're collecting off the property, because we're using essentially standard rates for construction of the development. And because clearly that would be a poor negotiating position for ours if we were essentially negotiating away all our community amenity contributions by allowing the developer to invest in things on their site, irrespective of our needs. So absolutely want to flag that for council, that we don't, we recognize that risk, and we definitely plan to avoid that through our analysis with our advice from our external consultant. And I think the councillor makes a very important point, that it is extremely useful for the community, not just for developers, for the community broadly, to understand if there is a preferred objective for council in terms of the affordability levels, in terms of the numbers of units, and in terms of the type of housing. And I think that's a key conversation that we'll have, I think, starting we have had in the past, but again, we'll have in July when we bring forward the housing needs report, so that council can identify expectations for the amount of housing needed in the community. And then we can ensure that as projects come forward, they're always moving the dial forward in terms of achieving that end objective. Thank you.
Just to push back, Mr. Milburn, what this present council has spoken about since it was inaugurated is the same thing the previous council was speaking about. It hasn't changed, except that we have not made it definite to what we will accept and what we won't accept as far as affordable housing. So that's part of it that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Ma.
Sorry. I'm just taking all this in. Just following along on like FAQs and the CACs. Dan, you might have touched on this, but I'll give you an opportunity to elaborate. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it for the benefit of everyone. I know that we have a list of things that are kind of acceptable CACs, but when you're in your negotiations, who decides what's selected? Is it you saying to the developer, here's our list of 10, but we really want these 3, and one of the 3 is, affordable housing? Is that how it works? And if it is, are you not really waiting for clear direction from council? That's my first part.
Right. Thank you, Worship. Yeah, what we do is we point them to council's policies. So either the community amenity contribution policy, the housing council's housing strategy, in essence, adopted in 2016, as well as the implementation plans and the public realm strategies. So we point them to those standards that council has set in policy. And when there is opportunities for thinking about what else that might be needed, developers may present to the public as part of their yearly input meeting, and as part of their consultations. They may present alternatives to that or embellishments to that, and then they receive some general feedback from the community, which is then summarized and presented to council in our facilitated PIM reports. And so I guess this is a roundabout description of the process, but in essence, we're pointing them to council policy. The developer then responds to that, and we're trying to move them as close to exactly what council's asked for. They may present alternatives to the public to try to garner support for their project. But at the end of the day, what we try to negotiate towards is a list of amenities, consistent with council's policy direction, and then that comes forward in the readings, the various reports that,
Right.
that council then reads the bylaw. So the actual amenities themselves that are listed, as well as development cost charges, contributions, and other things. And then we try to summarize the value of those as well to the community. And then we give advice to council on whether or not that value is consistent with how much CAC we think can be extracted from the project.
Following up on that, without naming the specific development, but I'm sure you'll know which one I'm talking about. You know, if a developer says, look, I'll give you a right of way, so, you know, residents in another town center can get out and head east easily.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably not on the list, but that's potentially something of value that would come forward, right? So I think the hard part for me tonight is we all want to have a great district to live in, you know, trying to make sure that any new residents have amenities, but at the same time, I think it's going to cost us to kind of keep up and, you know, keep up with the Joneses next door. But what I'm hearing is, you know, it's really up to council to give clear direction to staff who will then negotiate with the developer. But at the same time, the developer comes back with something that might garner some value that we didn't think about. You know, we should be open to that. So, you know,
I think the point we're discussing though is that we have to get away from the negotiation and move towards case by case. And then the negotiation is over us establishing a list of what we expect from developments within a zone, rather than that specific development is going to contribute that specific amenity. Instead, they're going to
but then-
contribute some dollars to a pool that will fund it.
would we have lost out on this potential development of the right of way? Because if we were so hard and fast on what's acceptable, would we have missed that opportunity?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And that's the challenge with having any kind of very specific bylaw or policy. We know that's where we're likely headed in terms of direction from the province and necessity because of the housing targets, essentially taking away our negotiating power on a case-by-case basis. And so it's our strong recommendation that we move towards away from negotiated case-by-case discussions like you're describing, towards bylaw or policy specified descriptions of the amenities that are desired by the community. And then the developers contribute cash or amenities on site of that value relative to the bylaw rate. So you'd have a certain rate per square meter of constructed area, just like you would for development cost charges. We anticipate that's where we're likely headed in the future. Now, you bring up the issue that when you do set those pre-established rates, you got to make sure they're right. You've got to make sure you've got the right basket of amenities. And that's really the mayor's point, is you want to make sure that you routinely look at that list of amenities, just like we look at the list of infrastructure in the DCC bylaw, and update that based on any new information. Because we know we won't get everything right perfectly the first time. We'll have to adjust over time, and we'll need to adjust likely on a semi-annual, no, am I using the right term? Biannual basis, not semi-annual, would be my recommendation, just because the amount of change in the marketplace is so great.
Yeah, I guess the point, or one other point is, we were trying to work with developers, and the developers we should work with are the ones that are producing what we want, and the ones that don't, they won't be producing in the district. But I think if we're clear with the developers what we're prepared to accept, and this will probably go into, you know, getting to that fixed rate, but we need to be clear on what we want and communicate that. And when we hit that, take it. When we don't, send them away to come back. But we also need to be open when someone comes with an idea that say, hey, this will solve our transportation issues, something that we didn't think about.
Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation, obviously all the hard work that's gone into preparing the reports. And thanks everyone for their comments. It's an interesting conversation. And also, I can't help but reflect on the complexity and the competing values and philosophies that are being brought to bear to these discussions. I suppose as I was listening and as I contemplated in advance of tonight as well. I tried to back up a little bit, get some height over the problem and look at it from a bit of a higher vantage point. I mean, I think the challenge that we face is that times have changed. Community priorities have changed, and community issues have changed. I mean, if we're talking about a set of policies that were put in place in 2011 as a result of consultations that took place between 2000 and
World is a different place.
yeah, it's an entirely different place. And I mean, in the last local government election that we all participated in, the community was telling us that the community is on fire over two issues. One is affordability, and the fact that there's a whole segment of our community that can't even, including my children and many others, who can't even contemplate living here. And transportation. I mean, it remains a dogged issue for people in the North Shore. We can't get around. So there's a part of me that looks at this whole, and I suppose in this respect, I am reflecting Councillor Murray's comments. There's a part of me that looks at this and asks myself, we're talking about millions of dollars here. Are we really focusing that where the community needs it the most? I mean, and from my perspective, when I see rental housing and social housing occupying 95 million of this, I mean, I'm content. And I appreciate there's arguments as to how that's derived at in terms of foregone CACs and is it a magic number? But I mean, I think if we're saying that half of the value of our community vanity contributions since 2011 have been in the form of creating a broader housing mix, I'm totally in favor of that. That's a good thing. I mean, our goal is to try to use all of the money that flows into the district in a way that enhances our quality of life, that serves the district, that serves the needs that are most acute. And I do think the marble countertops has been brought forward as an analogy to what we're doing. I mean, I do think there's a danger that we're not focusing our spending of all types where the community needs it the most at the moment. Mr. Milburn said early in his presentation that the input of the community was received in 2011 to form now 12 years ago, 13 years ago, to form these priorities. I mean, it I think is time that the community is asked, how do we need to spend these resources, given that there is a significant shift in our issues in our community, and given that there's just not enough to go around. We can't meet all these various needs. Obviously, community amenity contributions play some role in trying to address the most pressing needs currently existing in our community. So I'm not sure how helpful that is by way of direction, but those are the thoughts that occur to me as I consider these figures, the presentations that's being made, the needs that exist, and what I see as a shifting priority or a set of urgencies in terms of priorities in our community. So thank you for your presentation.
Mr. Milburn?
I just wanted to give a brief clarity. Pardon me if I misspoke. I just wanted to go back to the description. It's been an evolving conversation of councils about the amenities in the community. Certainly the 2011 OCP was a foundational document to that conversation. Really in terms of defining, the on-street amenities and the public plazas and the civic facilities, it was the center's implementation plans between 2013 to 2017 that were provided a lot of instruction and definition to that. And that's all the material that's cut and paste into the attachment 2 in the document. But that's been further embellished by, the evolving public art program when Heather came here and presented to council a fairly substantial public art program, and of course council's childcare action plan. So it's been an evolving stream, and I just didn't want to leave you the impression that it was a 12-year-old conversation and we haven't talked about it since. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that, but I think the fundamental philosophy of how we're allocating our CACs was set in the 2011 community official community plan, and it was set on input received prior to then, and that is now at the pace that our community evolves. That is now a long, long time ago in terms of priorities. So that's really and the point I'm making there. And I mean, just in terms of all of these needs, I mean, they're also attractive when you're in public art and heritage and childcare, seniors care. They're also attractive when you're presented with them, and they are very compelling and very important. I mean, our challenge is we only have so many resources to go around. And in the face of that, are we really targeting our resources where they are currently most desperately needed, which is from my point of view, in two sectors. At least this is what I keep hearing from the community, creating a greater housing mix of more affordable housing, so we have a more inclusive community, and transportation, so we can get around. That's, people aren't talking about the other issues. That's what people are talking about.
I was just going to say that, you know, some of the changes aren't codified in policy, right? Like when you, in 2011, if you read the document and if you saw the actions of the council in the subsequent years, you would have assumed that our policy was to extract as much cash from a development as we possibly can in order to be able to provide whatever else elsewhere. And then in 2018, I think we definitely turned a corner and said, no, we want to see more of these benefits baked into the projects. We want to see units sprinkled throughout. We want to see, rather than just cash CACs out. And so that's not codified in a policy. That was something that, you know, all of those rezonings and OCP amendments that took point from that point, that was just simply the developer had to get 4 votes. And so they had to come back out and see what the new levers to power were for it. But again, that's not something we've actually put in policy, nor could we compel future councils to vote according to that necessarily. And so there's always going to be an element of it that is going to be a negotiation because the council has to be persuaded. A small percentage of our developments are coming in with no rezoning needed, and almost all of the major developments are coming in with an OCP amendment as well. And so there's always going to be an element of it that's negotiation, as much as the efforts are going to be there to give advance warning and notice about what the expectations are going to be. Councillor Pope and Murray. Councillor Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the community has spoken loud and clear for many years about what its priorities are. I do not think we need to go back and do community engagement about what they want to be done with CACs. It's pretty clear to me, and I think every member of this council, that the priority is affordable housing and a housing mix in the district that meets the needs of this community. And I would like to remind everyone about the letter that Kelly Bond sent the other night, apprising me of all of the work that's been previously done on CACs, and that in 2020, the Affordable Housing Task Force recommended cash in lieu of CACs be directed to the Affordable Housing Fund. Nothing happened. In 2021, the same recommendation was subsequently included in the September 2021 Task Force final report goals, and that was, quote, to build up the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund in addition to affordable housing negotiated through in-kind CACs. Create a policy for cash in lieu CACs that allocates a set percentage of these contributions directly to the reserve fund. And yet this has never happened. Why hasn't this happened? That's my first question.
Yep, Mr. Daniluk.
Yeah, just briefly, we've had many conversations with Ms. Bond, and it's been an option that we've been looking at. It's just that this pending legislation is likely to have some impact on what that looks like.
But it also means acceptance that you're not going to bake the benefit into the project. It means that
Just getting a little off track for me. Council endorsed and supported all the recommendations. And staff were directed to find ways to implement these specific recommendations. And yet it never happened.
Mr. Milburn?
Your worship, we reported back on each of the recommendations provided by the task force. There certainly were some recommendations that weren't followed to the letter.
No,
and
these
some-
were ones that council endorsed.
And just to be clear, some of them were lobbying efforts that required going to the province and talking about changes to make that change. In what council did do in response to that direction was council actually created a housing reserve and started allocating tax dollars towards it. How much per year, Mr. Danielek?
Just over $500,000.
Over
per year.
$500,000. And the other thing that council did is council, as your worship mentioned, started to negotiate really significant housing contributions in each project, as opposed to taking the cash and trying to invest that and pool those dollars into, I guess, a large project elsewhere, possibly on district lands. I'm not sure how we would spend that money. That would be up to council. But that's where council's focus has been, is trying to, you can use the term extract, but trying to negotiate for a sizable increase to rental units and affordable units in the projects that come forward, and that being the contribution. The key question, the key challenge, I guess, is why I'm describing this a little bit, is if we take all of the community amenity contribution and entirely allocate it to housing, that means that the people that move into the rental units and the affordable units will either, one, not have the infrastructure they need in order to support their daily needs and get to the active transportation that they need.
This was never about taking all of the money from the CACs and putting it into affordable. This was talked about taking a percentage, and staff were to have come back with ways to implement those recommendations. So again, I'm asking, this has never happened, and I would like it to happen, and it very much needs to happen.
And your worship, I would expect that we'll come back with some specific advice on that this fall. We anticipate, as Mr. Dunn mentioned, changes at the provincial level will directly impact the viability of that recommendation.
But that recommendation was from 2020, and these recommendations from the province have just been developed in the last 8 months. So to use that, I'm sorry, Mary Lou, to use that
As an excuse as to why that recommendation that council gave direction for wasn't implemented. I'm sorry, I have a problem with that.
Councillor Murray, there's a big problem with this. It's council's discretion to implement this policy. And so when a development comes forward, and let's say it's got 6 affordable units proposed for it, we go along and say, no, we'd actually rather it's 3, and we take cash out and put it in an affordable housing fund. This council's never done that.
Except that the recommendation was brought forward in 2020, and Mr. Milburn is saying those recommendations will be impacted by the legislation that the province is bringing in the fall. But that doesn't answer the question that Councillor Pope's asking. It has nothing to do with what the legislation is.
I'm responding to what Councillor Pope said, is that you have to then make an active decision on each development to not build it into the development, instead make it cash for some future development somewhere else. And I got to tell you, it's not our core business to be building this housing. Let's get them to build it wherever we reasonably can. Otherwise, the units will not show up with the development sprinkled out to the community. I'm just saying that that's the difference of it. I totally agree with your comment, but what you have to then do is each time the council makes a decision about a particular project, we have to say, no, we actually don't want as many units. We'd rather have cash come back into the thing, which is the way the council did it for a very long period of time. And I got to tell you, it was terrible at producing low cost and affordable units.
Well, I think I'm beginning to understand why this never happened, Mr. Mayor. And I think it's because of your resistance to it.
It's every vote that the council has had on those developments. And I have the exact same vote at that table as you do.
Have a policy in place under a new council now. Let's put the past behind us, but a policy in place that allocates a percentage of the CACs to affordable housing. Then there aren't case-by-case decisions made on it doesn't have to keep coming to council. It's in policy, so that policy sets the goals for what we all say is a priority. We all say affordable housing is a priority. That's the way to do it. Previous councils have decided that's the way to do it. They've asked staff to come up with some suggestions or some ways of doing it. That hasn't happened. And now here I am asking for this again. You can vote against it, Mr. Mayor, but previous councils have said that's what they want. That's what this council is saying it wants.
Yeah. I think there's a misunderstanding of what Ms. Bond has been asking about, because Kelly Bond and I have had many conversations over the years about this issue. Where we reasonably can bake the benefit into the development, that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck. Taking cash out does not produce units in the same way. And so having a policy that the net result is fewer affordable units built, I'm sorry, I'm not.
That's not necessarily the outcome. You're just saying it is. And I mean, when we're in a situation where we're trying to use all the tools in our toolbox to create affordable housing, to fund more units that have affordable housing in them, then we need to look at all aspects of this, and that's one of them.
I've got Councillor Forbes. Go ahead, Councillor Forbes. Oh, sorry, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Murray was up. Sorry, you guys are joining the queue on two different systems. Sorry about that. Councillor Murray, you're up first.
And how much do we have in the Affordable Housing Fund, Mr. Donnellan?
I believe it's in the range of 4 million.
Why don't we ever know the exact numbers? Like, what's the number? It shouldn't have just be like when we're talking about CACs and we've got all this stuff on the list. What is it, like 200 million, 300 million?
The amount in the Affordable Housing Fund?
Yeah, how much is it?
At the end of 2022, I believe it's just over $4 million, but it's a lot of that is earmarked for some of the housing already in progress.
So I have to tell you that when we have these conversations and you're putting your perspective forward, and we've talked about creating a fund to be able to buy land in town centers. Buy land in town centers using, what was the fund you were going to use, Mr. Milburn, to buy land in town centers? We've had that conversation over the years that we could use money to buy land in town centers.
Mr. Milburn.
Thank you, Worship. So there is a fund that council manages, the Land Opportunity Fund, to acquire lands, and council has acquired 821 Capilano, for example, in the last year.
For a road.
For a portion of road and for the potential for other uses as directed by council.
Mhm.
And I just have to take a step back and suggest to council, staff has actually never approved DCC or CAC, actually. Staff has never approved a CAC. Every single community amenity contribution has been presented to council and recommendations. We certainly provide recommendations to council, but it's always council's choice as to what to invest that money in. Mm-hmm. And so as you've mentioned tonight, I just wanted to mention that because I'm feeling a little bit of hostility from some council members suggesting that somehow staff have misdirected or misallocated council's funds, and that is absolutely not the case. The other point I would make is that on the next council agenda, staff is recommending that there is a new funding source available called the Housing Accelerator Fund from CMHC. And that's a potential additional source of funds, approximately $6 million to $9.5 million, we estimate. We don't know the exact amount that could be available. And many communities across Canada are going to be applying for that fund. And that's a potential additional source of funds that could be directed to the housing fund at the district to invest in the development of housing on district lands or elsewhere.
I think there's so many layers of complexity with all of this, Mayor Little, and certainly over the years since I was first elected in '97, the reports were 20 pages long. Now they're 200 pages long, and you'd need 3 degrees to be able to get through them. The workshops have turned into presentations, not sort of a back and forth. This is the best back and forth we've had in a while. And that's what workshops were created to do. We are very fortunate in the region in that we have land. The district's always had land. We've maintained our land because we haven't sold it. Most councils have been very fervent that we are not going to sell our land. And so it does seem curious as to why we couldn't extract dollars, and we have 27 million sitting in the CAC fund on your slide. OCP CAC policy, we have $27 million. Like, I'd just like to know how much money we have on somewhere like anywhere? What's a total that council could use
Well,
to take some money, that is not allocated to public realm, urban trails, parks and plazas, public art, to be able to use for some of those recommendations that came forward from the Affordable Housing Task Force? I will tell you that that committee worked very hard and felt very challenged at times, many of them that spoke to me, in regards to what they were able to accomplish. It was hard to get information. It was hard to be able to bring forward ideas without some sort of a complex discussion with staff. It was a challenging committee to sit on. And so I feel like this is sort of we're at a precipice here, that maybe we're going to start pivoting and going in a new direction with this new council. We're going to start pushing back a little bit and starting to, have some of the things that we want brought forward in a way that goes from the start to the finish. Because I think sometimes we make recommendations and we start them. And I think Councillor Popes brings up a good point. I think Kelly Bond has been very clear and consistent in her letter writing, in her briefs, in her discussions with you, Mr. Milburn, in her discussions with you, Mr. Daniluk, in her discussions with yourself, Mayor Little, myself, and other members of this council. She is very articulate. She is very clear on the policy. She is very clear on the legislation. And she continues to ask these questions. And I have to ask myself, why? Why does she have to continue to ask these questions? Like, why isn't these things that were these recommendations being brought forward? If staff doesn't agree with the recommendations or doesn't think it's a good direction, let's not go there. But maybe we should bring all of those recommendations forward in the fall and look at them and talk about them, because I feel like this council is actually really committed to affordable housing, using our land, building some affordable housing with some CAC contributions, or wherever we're going to get this money, Mr. Daniluk. I'm sure you can come up with where it is.
I need Mr. Daniluk to be able to respond on this, though.
I'm talking because I am so frustrated. I've been frustrated for years with this kind of thing. We are, and Councillor Hanson has said it very eloquently, better than I have, that the priorities were transportation and affordable housing, and yet we are still building more market with a sprinkle of affordable, hoping to get to some number that actually is going to accommodate people in this community. And it's not going to accommodate people in this community. They are continuing to be pushed out. So I hope that this is the beginning of a new direction that we're going in with some of the stuff, because it feels like it's business as usual, and it's not business as usual. We are a different place. We are a different community. We are a different society. We almost had a forest fire. I've got a strata on Mount Seymour Parkway that have to spend $40,000 to fix the public art piece that was included in the development that we passed 15 years ago, because the thing's falling apart and it needs to be refurbished. 40 grand for 67 units on Mount Seymour Parkway that they're going to have to incur as part of their strata. And they wrote a letter to all of us, right? Like, what is happening? Where is all this money coming from? We are getting more unaffordable as the day goes by, and we still keep going in the same direction.
I've got to keep it going and get other people an opportunity to speak as well. But
Thank you, Councilor.
let's be clear about that, though, that that money is in the 5-year financial plan, and it's committed to a bunch of projects as well. Mr. Daniluk?
We need to look at this.
To answer the question, yes, the financial plan lays out how we're going to be expending.
So it's not a new source of $27 million that's uncommitted to projects. This is already committed to community amenity projects that we've already identified and council's already passed, correct?
Correct, according to the list that we shared earlier. I will say that definitely there has been a change in the times, and we do have a reserve funds bylaw that spells out how growth what is collected and what it can be spent on. And to Councillor Hanson's point earlier, we can take a step back and look at this problem a little bit more holistically now that the legislation is changing. And the staff do enjoy working with those committees, in particular Ms. Bond, and she's been very helpful. And I would have liked to have reached out to her in advance of this conversation, but I never had a had an opportunity to, but the fact is that the legislation is likely changing, and that option that she's looking at may no longer be viable. So we just have to be aware of that and revisit it when we get new direction.
Councillors Forbes, Hanson, and Pope. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to say I agree with what you were saying at the end there when things were getting a little heated, a little raised. And I'd also like to say that I'm really sick and tired of people assuming they know what went on the last council. New councillors should ask questions to find out what went on rather than attack and say that the previous council didn't do this or didn't do that. So I just want to say that a number of us ran in 2018 solely on transportation and affordable housing, and we got elected. We changed the direction in 2018. That's why we have all the rentals that went up in the last 4 years that hadn't gone up in the previous many terms before us, because as you said, Mayor, they were taking the cash, the CAC, getting as much out of development as they could, and they weren't providing the correct, diverse, affordable housing that the community needed. And I will say I sat on the implementation committee right before the task force committee and right before the year before I got elected as a councillor. And our recommendations from that committee were ignored, and they are many of the exact same ones that the task force came up with again. So this problem has been known. It's not brand new. It's not just come forward from the task force. It's been there. It was from the implementation monitoring committee as well. So this isn't new. And I'm just speaking for myself at this point. What is frustrating is, and I'm sorry to have to put it this way, I have respect for every staff member. I don't know where the issue is. I don't know if it's in process. I don't know if it's in personality. I don't know why it goes through the cracks. But all of the first term, we said, don't bring us anything unless it's rental. Don't bring us anything unless we get affordable or diverse housing out of it. And what happens now, I hear Mr. Milburn talking here tonight saying it's at our direction. Well, the previous council gave staff the direction. Don't get those things all the way up to the council level where it's already put in front of us. And when we've told you what we will accept and what we won't accept. So I think things are getting from the permit or the development stages, planning stages, they're getting pushed somehow up to council when we explicitly said we didn't want these things. We wanted diverse, affordable, rental, supportive housing. So I just want to make that point. I've been fighting for that, and I ran on that. And I served on a committee before I was even a councillor arguing for that. So I just want to make it clear, this isn't new. There seems to be a communication breakdown because we've made things really clear in the last term and we didn't get what we wanted. As you can tell, because we're not any more affordable, we did turn it around for rental. But the other thing that we did turn around is we got D&V land actually used for supportive housing down on 16th. We are giving our land, and our land is worth millions of dollars. So if you want to just keep arguing with the developer, where I just said I'll bring a report forward in September, I want 20% affordable housing. The developer is going to turn around and look at you and go, okay, I can't afford that. I'll give you 10% in cash and 10% in housing. No, as the mayor said, it's cheaper to let them build it. We can do it diversely throughout the community by putting them in some buildings. And they've got all the headaches and responsibilities of getting it done. So I'm sorry, it's you say cash in lieu of, well, it's also land in lieu of cash that we are giving up. And you can't just look at the ending balance of the affordable housing account and say, oh, that's all we put in. No, we haven't. We put in something like $80 million or $90 million worth of land. And the council before the last council didn't do that. So we've made a number of steps, and I think we've got more bang for our buck than if we'd accepted cash. Because cash would sit there until it got built up enough, and then we'd have to go find partners, and things would be delayed for 6 or 7 years like Delbrook is. That's my rant. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Hanson, followed by Councillor Pope. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. And I want to address a little bit the discussion of the history that's brought us here. I mean, I have sat in this council since 2014, so 9 years, and I've seen a lot, and I've witnessed a lot of the toing and froing. I'm not sure at this stage, though, if our goal, if this council's goal is to make some positive impacts in our community over the issues that matter, and we know what those issues are, I don't know that we're going to get all that much out of looking. Just like, you know, for success-oriented people, we look to the future, we look to what we can influence and not so much what's already in the past. And so I'm just going to put that idea out there. I think we're better off to focus on what we can influence going forward. I mean, the reality is we don't have enough money and resources to address all the many needs of our community. And certainly we don't have enough money to address the housing needs of our community. And I mean, this isn't just a North Vancouver district problem. This is a worldwide problem. Economic factors that are making housing terribly affordable and causing some people to have multiple homes and other people to live in forests. It's a worldwide problem that requires governmental action at all levels. But what I do think is clear is that notwithstanding the fact we have a limited amount of money, and notwithstanding the fact that there's a lot of competing needs at this time amongst this council and this community, our priority needs to be affordable and social housing. What can we do? And that includes with the CACs. What can we do with these CACs? Our priority, the lens of this council, and I hear it from all councillors, it's not just one of us, it's all of us. The lens is affordable housing, diverse housing in our community. What can we do? So I'll leave that as a final statement about CACs. I appreciate that there's an awful lot of detail to be addressed. There's an awful lot of issues to be considered. But when we consider those issues, let's keep in mind that our priority right now is doing what we can in the direction of affordable and diverse housing in the district. Thank you.
Councillor Hanson, Councillor Pope.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. I agree with you. The big question is, what can we do to enable more affordable housing and social housing while using the CACs? And interestingly, Kelly Bond very nicely highlighted our approved financial workbook and quotes it here, which says, as social and affordable housing is a priority, allocating a fixed percentage of community amenity contributions continues to be an option to ensure adequate funding. So that to me says that there is a plan in place of some sort, or do we need to move a motion? Or I just don't understand why we're having this discussion about using CACs or allocating a percentage of them. At the risk of, I don't want to repeat everything I said earlier, but this seems pretty clear to me. And I also just wanted to respond to Councillor Forbes' comment about attacking previous councils. And in no way was I doing that. Actually, I was pointing out that previous councils had in fact endorsed, fully endorsed unanimously these options in the past, and that they just had not happened. So
I think Mr. Daniluk has a response.
Just briefly, we do carry forward recommended financial strategies. That was one of the financial strategies. And now it's just in question whether or not we can or can't do that. So we're waiting for direction from the province.
As to whether
why
or
do we
not
need direction from the province on that?
Through your worship to Councillor Pope, with the pending legislation, we're not exactly sure how it's going to be laid out in the future. My understanding right now is it may be going in a different direction, but we'll have
So
to
we
wait till
can
fall.
today, but it may be overridden by September.
Okay, well, I just don't think we can wait around forever and wait and see and wait and see and wait and see what the province is going to do, if it may or may not have anything to do with CACs. It may not. We need to move forward. We need to help our community. We need to respond to our community's needs now in whatever way we can. And this is one of them.
Just my own comments on this. I guess what I really want to look for the health of the organization is, do we have, are we setting aside enough resources to look after community needs? Do we have enough tools and options in order to be able to both apply those to our priorities and also make sure that they're fair and equitable in tools that we can use in order to be able to get it? And I think, staff have been recognizing that that this changing paradigm with the provincial government may affect things, and we're going to have to sort of wait and see how things fall out this fall. I've been satisfied that in the past, when we've set a particular target or we've set a particular priority, that we've been able to move towards it meaningfully with council votes. The position that we should run up a rental and affordable housing fund from the same limited amount of CACs means that you're deciding to not get stuff built into the project in order to be able to produce more cash. We can do that. I just don't think that it's a very good application of our resources. And so, and in fact, my recollection of every member of this council, I only have to go back a week to talk about a development that every member of this council said, we should have got more, we should have got more, we should have got more. If we actually had this policy in place, we'd be deciding to take cash instead of getting all of those amenities that this council, every single person around this council said we should have been able to get more rental units, we should have been able to get more. And so that's what is being said here, is that the policy going forward should be that we take a percentage of cash instead of fighting for those amenities to be baked into those developments. It is, if we decide to go that direction, it is going to be a big challenge for this council, because you're going to get even less at the time of rezoning in terms of actual amenities built or public benefit built in. You'll get cash. You will get cash. We saw that for years. We produced a tremendous amount of cash. It doesn't translate into units. It takes too long to build the units. It's not our core competency. We may be able to use it to buy some land and transfer into other projects, but there is no question that when they build it, we get a better deal in the development, and it actually produces more units. And so that's going to be our problem, is if we decided to go that direction, that's the debate council will have. You'll be at rezoning, you'll be discussing projects with almost no community amenities built into them, because you're trying to extract cash from it. And that's not, I think, in the best interest. I think it's a good fail-safe when you have a project that's too small to really produce enough of an amenity to actually produce an affordable unit in a project or whatever. Great, then take the money and put the money into an affordable housing fund. But when we have a large project, we should be building the benefits into the project. There should be rental, there should be non-market, there should be all kinds of different options baked into it. And it's actually a failure if we end up at the end of the day and we haven't maximized the public benefit in that project, and instead we've got some cash floating around. The cash should be the second option to building it into the projects. And that's my position. I've had that position for a long time now. I regret the period of time where we produced, particularly in the bottom of Cap Road, where we allowed the developers to pay cash out instead of actually producing units. And it resulted in us going through a period of time up until the Travel Lodge. The Travel Lodge is the first development in that neighborhood that we actually produced stuff baked into the project. Everything else, they decided it was cheaper for them to pay cash and not have it. And what you end up with is an exclusive neighborhood with no units built into it.
And what did we do?
Okay, so then where was the recommendation? Where was the recommendation from staff to say we should not be going in this direction? Where was the recommendation that said?
The recommendation from staff, what staff accepted is that it's one of the options that's available to us. That was what was accepted. And that is still one of the options. And as I said, when you have a small project that can't actually produce a unit, the second best option is to take cash out of it and put it into affordable housing fund.
Councillor Hanson and I voted against those projects, and we voted against those projects because those areas, and we knew that going in, and yet the recommendation from staff was that you go ahead with this public hearing, you go ahead and accept these bylaws. And that's what council did. It wasn't that go in this direction and you are going to gentrify that part of the community with no affordable housing whatsoever. And now that's come to pass. That's exactly what's happened. And we have been saying that for years, but every single application that comes to this chamber is in favor of going forward with these applications. Like, you know, we have to go back to see where we came from. That OCP was about moving people out of single family homes into density to open up single family homes for families and move seniors into, you know, density and allow some sort of affordable housing. And that housing became so unaffordable so quickly. And yet what happened? Nothing changed. We just kept going in the same direction. And we're still going in the same direction. It's so broken, and we don't want to recognize it. We don't want to go back and say building more market is not going to get us anywhere. And yet application after application after application is market, is bottom of Capilano Road, the big sign that sits on the teller, elevated luxury. Elevated luxury is what we're building at the bottom of Capilano Road. Like, we've done enough of that, and yet
resort style living on the North Shore. That's what it said.
But we're defending it like you know, it's how the game is played. It's what's you know, it's what we're supposed to be doing. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. You know, we have gentrified the North Shore, and it all falls at the responsibility of the people at this table and the people of this municipality. And I'm sorry, I've never heard in 27 years. We don't think you should go for, I think there's maybe been 3 applications, you know, with a recommendation of not to go forward. And, you know, I get now the legislation, you know, big brother's going to come in and frickin', you know, tell us what's going to happen if we don't do what they think is going to solve this problem, which it's not. It's going to actually make it worse because they're just talking about volume. They're not talking about social housing.
Yes,
so
they are.
No, they're talking about volume, but they're not saying prioritize social housing only. You're only going to build social housing. You're only going to build low barrier housing for people that are living on the street. They are talking about simple volume, and that encompasses all kinds of housing. And the last thing we need in this region is more luxury condos, quite frankly.
Mr. Milburn.
Intention from the province in the district of North Vancouver is not to just build volume. It's to build social housing and affordable housing. Other districts may be different. That's not the case here.
But they think supply and demand is going to bring the price down, and it hasn't worked.
It's not what they're doing. They're trying to get us to build affordable housing to meet the needs of this community so that we have some versus very little, almost none. Can I just pick up on what you were saying earlier?
Sorry, Mr. Milburn had a response to Councilor Murray's question, and then I have you as the next speaker. So, Mr. Milburn.
Sure. Just a useful clarification for council is that typically the recommendations that come forward to council have been discussed for years in terms of the community conversation, community engagement, discussion with staff. We are obligated to consider every application that comes before the district under law. What we do, though, is we do work with applicants over, as I say, quite some time to try to ensure that the application that's coming forward to council is in general alignment with council's policies, so they're written policies. And that's why they often do come forward with a recommendation of support from staff, because developers are typically unwilling to bring forward an application without that recommendation from staff, because that recommendation is essentially an acknowledgement and identification specifically of how the project does or does not align with council's policy expectations set out in the documents I listed earlier tonight. Always, again, it's at council's discretion to approve or not approve that project. Again, staff don't approve bylaws. That's council's determination. I believe there were over 800 strata units approved by the previous council. But most of the projects that came forward, there were significant increases to rental units, significant increase to mixed tenure type projects. And in terms of clarification, we have heard from the province that under housing targets, they will be providing some direction to the 10 local governments to provide specific amounts of housing by housing type. That includes by tenure, as well as affordable units and non-affordable units, as well as by bedroom number. There will be more additional details that we will hear. We have not had our first meeting with them yet. That's occurring soon, but we'll continue to keep council apprised of the information and requests that come forward from the province.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Pope.
Just picking up on what you were saying earlier, Mr. Mayor, about the reasons that you are opposed to allocating a certain percentage of CACs to the Affordable Housing Fund. I hear what you're saying. I think, though, that if we didn't go that way, then the other way to go is to ask for every development, say within a certain zone, within a certain size of development, that they allocate 20% to affordable housing, 15, 20%, something like that. And I think it has to be like one or the other, but it has to be in a policy somewhere so that we can get to where we need to go.
And if I may, I think we have been pursuing that. When you say 800 units for strata, what does that mean the other 800 units were? Right? Because we approved 1,600 units last year, which meant 50% of the units we produced were either rental, non-market, all of the other classes of housing rather than just straight market strata. Is that fair, Mr. Milburn?
That's correct. So in the November 2018 to November, oh, pardon me, this was November 2018 to 2022. It was 60 supportive housing units. So that was the first supportive housing project we'd seen on the North Shore in a very long time. Critical housing need. 410 social housing units. These were rental units. That was predominantly made up of the Riverside Social Housing Project. That's a Metro Vancouver project in Riverside. Sanford Housing and the Delbert Project, all approved by the last council. And that added up to 410 social housing units. Those are affordable rental units. And then 513 market rental housing units. So those are at market rates, but it's new rental units that were sorely needed in the community. And then market housing ownership units, 835 for a total of 1,818 units approved between those dates.
So the reason why I get a bit of a visceral response to it is we are doing exactly what we said we were going to do. And so hearing people say, we're not doing it, we're not doing it. We are doing it. In fact, now arguably, Councillor Murray identifies that, you know, we haven't said no to developments. For 22 months, we didn't approve a single development because all of the developments that were coming forward were seeking cash. And it took 22 months of going back to the development industry and saying, you got to bake it in. You got to bake it in. Come forward with proposals that have these things built into them. The levers of power have changed in the community. The priorities have changed. I expressed my regrets publicly that we just took cash out of lower cap instead of actually building the units in there. And so we did turn that corner. And it took a long time for those developments to start reflecting that. And now you see it. Now you see it. Last year, 50% of the units have some kind of mix into it, which is versus what got produced in lower cap under a cash option, which was none of that. And so that's why I'm saying I really don't want to go back to those days. It doesn't reflect our priorities in the community. Fully support us having it as a secondary option when we can't negotiate something in, the site is too small, there's some other reason for it, that it is a good second option. It's just not a good first option. The best first option is to bake the benefits into the development or it doesn't get produced. But I've been on the soapbox too much. Councillor Pope, your name's still on there, is that from before?
No.
Okay. We've had a good go round on this, I would say. I wish we had the benefit of Councillor Back's comments, but I'm sure we'll press Councillor Back for his comments going forward and make sure they get directly to you, Mr. Milburn. I would say we have probably, you're not looking for a specific direction tonight. You wanted to receive the feedback from the council. Moving receipt is probably fair. Is there a seconder on receipt? Seconded by Councillor Hanson. I'm going to call the question. All in favor, contrary minded, motion carries. It's received. In the absence of both Councillors Back and Mr. Stewart, I think probably the second item on the agenda, workshops, is probably not a great use of our time at this moment. I will just say, and we have had a number of members of the public present, and I apologize. I probably should have had, well, no decision, no direction was made tonight, but would any members of the public that are joining the meeting virtually or here in the council chamber, our policy is to allow up to 10 minutes at the end of the council workshop for comments, and just checking to see, would anybody like to add their comments? I don't, oh, Corey Cost, if we can move Dr. Cost, we just move everybody over to the panel, that'd be great.
Good evening.
Dr. Cost, welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
I'm very pleased with this workshop. I think you've brought things to the surface, which should have been brought to the surface in the past, I'm afraid. And I look hopefully to the future of implementing what you have said as a group. I know, for example, that transportation is a big issue, and I feel it's not going to get solved through putting more transit systems in place, because we are not that kind of community. I think the only way to resolve that and improve it is actually go back to build some roads, which is what we need in this district to be able to move around. The CACs are used since, let me read this. It says here, CACs are the only way to get your amenities. Well, of course, there is a second way, and that is you raise taxes from the community. It isn't a nice way for the community, but it does allow you to get the amenities from the people who all benefit from it. So I was hoping there would be more public participation. I would have liked to have seen Dan Milburn's 5 questions in the report beforehand, because they sort of jumped at us, and I'm sure council felt like I did. It was difficult to answer those questions on the fly. You need some time. As far as the arts program is concerned, this is my last comment. I'm sorry if I sound anti-arts. I don't think we need arts. It's all around us. We live in a community that has such a wonderful environment. That's about as artistic environment as you could possibly want. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Got a few more minutes. Would anybody else, members of the public, like to add their comments to the meeting? Yes, come on down. Welcome, Eric. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Okay. Is it on? Okay, yeah. I'm just sort of talking right off the top here about this housing issue. My name is Eric Skronik, 3151 Woodbine in Edgewater Village. It just seems to be a total rat's nest, this whole issue about housing. There's all this terminology thrown around, affordable housing, social housing, market housing. And I think the provincial government is doing the wrong thing by forcing all of these kinds of things. Everybody keeps talking about rental housing. My personal opinion, talking to people around, people don't want rental housing. They want housing that they can buy. The only reason they're going to rental housing is because they can't afford housing that they can buy. So what we need, and I think it's sort of above the municipal pay grade, is for the provincial government. What people want is affordable, livable, market housing, not subsidized, not whatever, but that's what we need to make this thing work. And I don't know how we get to that. And you know, the big thing is that, as Councillor Hanson said, it's a worldwide problem. It certainly is, because nobody's addressing what the real problem is. And we're never going to win this. That's the unfortunate thing. And but just taking cash, absolutely, it's almost impossible for the municipality to take up that, because I don't know what you get out of it. You know, like if you have $27 million, tell me, what can I build? 10 units, 20 units? Like, we don't need 20 units. We need hundreds of units. So like you say, just taking the cash doesn't really get you too much. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Okay, I don't see any additional speakers. Oh, there we go. Lyle Craver. Your mute is back on. It went off for a moment and then it went back on. Oh.
Where are we here?
There
Here
we go. I can now hear you, Lyle.
Thank you very kindly, Your Worship. Okay. I am another voice for those who do not believe that taking everything that they can get cash-wise from developers as opposed to building it in is an effective method of doing it. Bottom line is, the people of North Van District have certain expertises. Builders have a completely different set of expertises. And you don't really want to turn the projects over to the non-experts when the experts are available. Now, I have 3 children. One of them lives in the bedroom that she's lived in since she's 5 years old because that's her best housing option. Her brother lives in South Burnaby in a basement suite along with his wife and young child, because that seems to be the best they can come up with. My third daughter is a homeowner, but she had to go to England to do so. Bottom line is, at this point, my kids' main prospect of ownership rests in probate, in my demise. And we have simply got to do better than that. I don't believe that the people of North Vancouver really have a great deal of expertise in actually building these units. And so everything we can do to get them built in from square one is how we ought to be doing. And let's not have any more farces like the community amenity contribution about 10 years ago, which involved the developer building a statue. It turned out that the shape of the apartment complex was in the form of the letter C. Across the lips of the letter C, the developer built planted a series of shrubbery, which started at about 5 feet high and have since grown to 20 plus, thereby completely obscuring the visibility of his so-called community amenity to the public. Last I heard, that's not how CACs were supposed to go. Bottom line is, we've done a lot of things right. And I do think that notwithstanding the fact that it's 10 years old, that the original OCP did draw a fairly decent blueprint of what we actually wanted. But the fact is that for 15 plus years, no purpose-built rental building was done in the entire district in North Vancouver. The council, especially that was elected in 2018, was mandated to make a big push on this, and to a certain extent it's been done, but I don't think we've achieved the lower cost housing types that we've been seeking. And I do think that this needs to be a priority at the present time. And again, I've been watching this council for considerably more than one term of council, and I agree there have been certain good things done, much to do yet, and I do hope this continues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Mr. Graber. Yes, I think we've definitely had a good discussion tonight. I'm sure that's going to help staff form future reports. I did want to express my appreciation to staff for their preparation for tonight. I want to thank members of the public for participating, and for council. And sometimes we have to get through some heated debates in order to find consensus on things. And I really appreciate everyone's efforts to listen to each other tonight. I will not bring forward the item 3.2 tonight. We're going to move that forward to a future meeting when we have a full set of council, and also Mr. Stewart, who is going to be presenting the report, present. We'll find another date for that as soon as we reasonably can. So at this point, I'll accept adjournment. Accepted. Thank you very much to everybody this evening. Have yourselves a great week.